So on an upbeat note, I think one of the interesting things is occasionally, well, when you're in the moment working somewhere, you don't always know how you're going to look back on it later. And there have been a couple times where actually the first time I ever heard this was Steve Jobs gave a speech at a company I worked at. And he was like, he basically told us it's miserable, it sucks, but someday we're going to look on this, back on this like it's the good old days. And you know what? It was pretty miserable at the time, but it turned out to be true. And I don't know if it was the good old days, or if it was you work with people smarter than you. You hope that they don't recognize that you're an imposter, and it's way more than imposter syndrome. And it turns out you create something as a group that is bigger than you thought possible by the individuals. And then you keep up with those people or that later. I mean, I have actually worked two, I'm holding my fingers up here, hoping I don't clip it later with the cropping, but basically the idea, I've worked two places where this happened, where the first one was obviously the one where, I worked at, I mentioned a minute ago, and that was in the 90s. And 20 years later, we still have a mailing list with like 200, but probably a few hundred people on it. And 5 years ago, they had a reunion where a few hundred people showed up. Like, have you ever worked at a place that went out of business, or where everybody left it, or the company got bought, and 20 years later people went to a reunion, or they still talk about or to each other? It is mind-blowing, and it was miserable at the time. And I actually was involved in another one, actually two others, but one other one, and it was miserable to start, and it was frustrating, and after 4 years I was burned out. But in that 4 years we accomplished a lot. People skilled up, everybody got smarter, even I got smarter, and it was great. And we actually had reunion and retirement parties, and the only people that came to those were people that were on that project, like, what would have been, like 15 years later. And I have not worked many other places where 15 years later you would have a reunion party. And now, at this point, that's pretty much died down, but it was a long dang time. And part of that's because a lot of people retired, or they went and moved to other places. But you just don't know. So the key, I think, is, I actually have done it 3 times, and one of them in a place I would never imagine. But what came out of that is people that I would work with later, that I would have recommended later. And so it is like super difficult, right, when you're in the moment. But just stand back and think, is this something I'm going to want as my personal resume? I don't even mean like work resume, but like, I worked with these people. We did this. And in a couple of those cases, we tried to get the band back together. We tried to get other people to come in and work again with us. It just never worked. Somehow we had the magic and we didn't know it, right? Both of the magic lightning in a bottle recapture jobs I did didn't work. But it was amazing. I mean, it was brutally hard, and it was tiring and everything else. So you can't go by where you are in your project today, right? You got to look at, what are we getting out of this? What are the people like I work with? And then someday you may get lucky and realize that you were on a good old days project where the people you want to read on LinkedIn are from that project. The people that you want a reunion with are on that project. The people that you would ask for recommendations of people to hire or would quit your job to go work with came from those projects. I've actually had 3. I forgot. And I have been super lucky, and I hope you are just as lucky and you have a project or someplace you work that years later you'll be like, man, I worked there and we did this. Have a great day.